Imagine a room in the British Museum in London. The year is 1872. The room is filled with mountains of clay fragments brought from Mesopotamia. They sit in boxes, on tables, on the floor. Many are burned, many are shattered. On them, someone once, very long ago, pressed strange marks. In this room sits a man. His name is George Smith. He is 32 years old. He has no university degree. By trade, he is an engraver. He makes printing plates for books. But in the evenings, he comes to the museum and teaches himself to read cuneiform. He learned alone because no one wanted to teach him. And then one day, while sorting through another batch of fragments, he finds a broken tablet. He fits the pieces together, tries to read, and suddenly he understands. Here is the same story he knows from the Bible, the story of the flood, of the boat, of the birds sent out to find land. Only here it happened not 1,000 years ago, but 2,000 years before the Bible was written. They say Smith jumped up from his chair and ran around the room, tearing off his clothes. He couldn't believe his eyes. Then he ran to the museum director and said, "I know who wrote the Bible." The director looked at him like he was mad. But Smith was right. The tablet he held was part of a vast poem, written 1,000 years before the first books of the Old Testament. A poem about a king of Uruk who lived so long ago that even the Sumerians considered him ancient. A king who built walls, fought monsters, and searched for immortality. A king named Gilgamesh. Smith had found not just a tablet. He had found the key to the oldest story in human history. But what do we know about Gilgamesh himself? Was he a real person? Or, like so many heroes, was he invented by priests who needed someone to worship? The answer to this question lay in the same Mesopotamian earth, in the same layers where the epic tablets were found. It was found not in a poem, but in a dull list that Sumerian scribes copied from one another for 1,000 years. That list is called the Sumerian King List, and today we'll open it together. The Sumerian King List is not a poem, not a prayer, not a law. It's just a list of names. The names of kings who ruled Mesopotamia from the beginning of time until the moment the list was written. The first tablets with this list were found in the early 20th century during excavations at Nippur, one of the oldest cities in Sumer. The excavations were led by the University of Pennsylvania, and among thousands of tablets, they found several fragments of the same text. Later, similar lists were found at Ur, at Lagash, at Susa. All of them copied a single original that was kept somewhere in a temple. The list is written in careful cuneiform. The kings are listed in order, with their cities and their years of reign. It begins with the words, "When kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was in Eridu." Then come the names of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years. 8 kings, 5 cities, 241,200 years. This is how the first lines read. This, of course, is not real history. This is mythological time, when, according to the Sumerians, gods still lived among people, and kings were demigods. But then, in the list, a sharp change occurs. The reign numbers get smaller. First, kings rule for several hundred years, then for 100, then for 50, and then, after the flood washes everything from the earth, and kingship is again lowered from heaven, we reach the first dynasty of Uruk. And there, among the names, stands one, Gilgamesh. His name is written like all the others. His city is named Uruk. His years of reign are given, 126 years. And after his name, there is a note. Son of Lilu, the priest of Kulaba. 126 years is a long time for a single person. It's still a mythological number, but it's no longer tens of thousands of years. It's approaching a real human span. And most importantly, Gilgamesh stands in that part of the list where there are no more gods, no more semi-mythical beings. There are just kings, rulers who built temples, fought with neighbors, left inscriptions on bricks. Such inscriptions were found too. In Uruk itself, in layers that archaeologists date to around the 27th century before our era, there are bricks with Gilgamesh's name. Not on the walls. The walls were rebuilt later, but on bricks that lay in the foundations of temples. Someone who lived a generation after Gilgamesh set these bricks into new construction to remember who built the first temple. Gilgamesh was a real king. He ruled Uruk about 5,000 years ago, and he built walls that can still be seen today if you travel to Iraq, to the mound of Warka. Now let's look at these walls. Not in dreams, not in books, but as archaeologists saw them. Uruk stood on the banks of the Euphrates, where the desert lies today. The city was surrounded by a wall almost 10 kilometers long. That's longer than the walls of any other city at that time. In some places, the wall was wide enough for 2 carts to pass. In others, it was so high you could see it from a day's journey away. German archaeologists, who have been digging at Uruk since 1912, found the remains of these walls. The oldest part, the so-called Wall of Gilgamesh, is made of bricks that were molded and dried in the sun 5,000 years ago. The bricks still hold. Not all of them, of course, but what remains shows the scale. This was no small fortress, but a city wall built to last centuries. In the epic, Gilgamesh boasts about these walls. At the very beginning of the poem, even before he meets Enkidu, there is a prologue where the hero says, "Walk around the wall of Uruk, examine its foundation. Do you see anywhere its equal?" This is not poetic license. This is a real wall that every inhabitant of Uruk saw every day. Archaeologists found not only bricks with Gilgamesh's name, they also found later inscriptions where kings who ruled hundreds of years after him called themselves restorers of the Wall of Gilgamesh. They didn't build a new wall. They repaired the old one, because a wall built by the ancient king was sacred to them. This is a rare case where legend and reality meet. Usually myths tell one thing and archaeology tells another. Here they tell the same story. Gilgamesh built the walls. The walls stood for 1,000 years. People remembered who built them. And 1,000 years later, they still called them by Gilgamesh's name. In the king list we discussed, after Gilgamesh's name come a few more kings of Uruk. Then the list moves to another city, then another. Kingship passed from city to city like a relay baton. But Uruk remained, and the walls remained. When scribes wrote down the epic 1,000 years after Gilgamesh, they were not inventing a hero. They were writing the story of a man whose walls they saw every day as they entered the city. How did a man who built walls become a hero of myth? This didn't happen in a day, and not by the will of a single scribe. It took 1,000 years. The earliest texts about Gilgamesh are not an epic. They are short songs in Sumerian, written on clay in the 21st century before our era. Each song has one episode. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the monster Humbaba. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull of heaven. Gilgamesh mourns his friend. Gilgamesh travels to Utnapishtim. These songs were separate. They were sung at festivals, perhaps in temples. Each had its own melody, its own rhythm. No one thought to join them into a single story. Then, after several hundred years, Sumerian stopped being a spoken language It was spoken by priests and scribes, but not by the people. And then Akkadian scribes, who spoke a different language, took these old songs and translated them. They joined the separate episodes into one continuous story. They added a prologue about the walls of Uruk. They added links between episodes. They turned songs into a poem. This happened around the 18th and 17th centuries before our era. By then, Gilgamesh had been dead for 1,500 years, but his name was still remembered. The most complete version of the epic is the so-called Nineveh version. It was written in the 7th century before our era for the library of King Ashurbanipal. The scribes who worked for the king did not invent a new text. They copied ancient tablets brought to them from Babylon and Uruk. They copied what had been written 1,000 years before them. When archaeologists found this library in the mid-19th century, they dug up 12 tablets of the epic, the 11th, the one with the flood story that George Smith saw, the 12th, a short edition about Enkidu's soul returning from the underworld. The tablets were burned when Nineveh fell. The fire that destroyed the city hardened the clay, made it as solid as stone. If not for the fire, the tablets would have crumbled to dust in 1,000 years. Instead, they lay underground for 25 centuries and reached us almost intact. We began with a man in a museum sorting through burned tablets, suddenly realizing he was reading a story written 1,000 years before the Bible. We went through the King List, where Gilgamesh stands among real kings, with a real name and a real city. We saw his walls, the very ones he boasted about in the epic, the very ones that were still called by his name 1,000 years later. We traced how short songs sung in temples grew into a poem, copied by scribes generation after generation, until it reached us. Now we have an answer to the question we started with. Was Gilgamesh a real person? Yes. He was king of Uruk about 5,000 years ago. He built walls that still stand, not whole, but they remain. His name survived in lists that scribes copied for 1,000 years. And from that name, from those walls, from songs sung about his deeds, the epic was born. The Gilgamesh of the epic is not an invention. He is that same man, only magnified to the scale of myth. His friendship with Enkidu, his journey to the edge of the world, his despair before death, all this was imagined by people who lived hundreds of years after him. But the core of the story is real. The walls, the name, and the memory of a king who did not want to die. In the next story, we'll talk about what was written on those tablets George Smith found, about Gilgamesh's journey to the edge of the world, about the man who survived the flood, and about the snake that stole immortality. The story continues. The tablet George Smith held in his hands in 1872 was not the first or the last. It was part of a long epic that scribes had copied for over 1,000 years. And on this tablet, the 11th of 12, was written the oldest flood story known to humanity. But to understand how Gilgamesh ended up on that tablet, we need to go back to the moment when his friend Enkidu died. In the epic, Enkidu's death is described slowly. For 12 days he lies on his bed, and each day his strength leaves him. Gilgamesh sits beside him. He does not sleep, he does not eat. He watches his friend die, and he can do nothing. When Enkidu is gone, Gilgamesh understands death for the first time. Not other people's deaths, the ones he saw in hunting and war, his own. He screams, tears his clothes, covers his head with ashes. He orders a statue of Enkidu made from lapis lazuli, the finest stone to be found. He places it in the temple so everyone will remember. But memory does not quiet fear. If Enkidu died, then he, Gilgamesh, will die too. And so he decides, I will go where no mortal has gone. I will find Utnapishtim, the only man the gods granted immortality after the flood. I will learn his secret. He puts on the lion's skin he killed himself and leaves Uruk, alone, walking toward his own death. Gilgamesh's journey to Utnapishtim takes several tablets in the epic. He passes through Mount Mashu, where the sun sets into the underworld. The entrance is guarded by scorpion people, half human, half dragon. They warn him. No one has taken this path and returned. Gilgamesh goes anyway. For 12 hours he walks in total darkness, 12 hours until his heart nearly bursts from fear. In the 13th hour he sees light. He emerges into the garden of the gods, where trees are hung with precious stones. But he does not stop. He goes on. On the shore of the Sea of Death he meets Siduri, the divine cupbearer who keeps a tavern at the edge of the world. She looks at the exhausted king and speaks words people still remember. You will never find eternal life, Gilgamesh. When the gods made humans, they kept immortality for themselves. Eat, drink, love. Let your house be full of children. This is human happiness. But Gilgamesh does not listen. He crosses the Sea of Death. He reaches Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim lives on an island in the middle of the waters. He looks like an ordinary man, but he does not age. Gilgamesh looks at him and does not understand. How is he different from me? Utnapishtim tells him his story. There was a time, he says, when the gods lived on earth with humans. But there were too many people. They made too much noise, and the gods grew tired of it. So they gathered in council and decided to destroy humanity with a flood. One of the gods, Ea, pitied the people. He could not break the oath made in council, but he could warn. He came to Utnapishtim in a dream and said, "Tear down your house and build a boat. Leave wealth, save life. Take on the boat the seed of all living creatures." Utnapishtim built the boat. For 7 days the boat was built, and his neighbors laughed at him. When the boat was ready, Utnapishtim loaded it with his family, his animals, and everything he could find. Then the flood came. For 6 days and 7 nights the rain fell and the waters rose. On the 7th day, Utnapishtim opened a window and saw that the land was gone. People had turned to clay. The boat came to rest on Mount Nisir. Utnapishtim sent out a dove, but the dove returned. He sent out a swallow, and the swallow returned. He sent out a raven, and the raven did not return. The waters had receded. When it was over, the gods regretted what they had done. They granted Utnapishtim and his wife immortality, but that was a one-time decision. For Gilgamesh, they can do nothing. Gilgamesh understands that he will not gain immortality, but Utnapishtim, seeing his despair, gives him one last chance. If you can stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights, he says, you will gain immortality. Gilgamesh sits down and falls asleep instantly. He cannot conquer sleep, the smallest death that comes to every person each night. When he wakes, Utnapishtim shows him that he did not sleep 1 night, but 7. For each night his wife baked bread and placed it beside him. The first loaf turned moldy, the second grew stale, the third turned damp, the fourth turned white, the fifth turned yellow, the sixth became fresh, the seventh was still warm. Gilgamesh sees he cannot even conquer sleep. How could he conquer death? But Utnapishtim, taking pity, reveals a secret. At the bottom of the sea grows a plant that restores youth. If you bring it up, you will not be immortal, but you will not grow old. Gilgamesh ties stones to his feet, dives, and brings up the plant. He swims back, holding it in his hand. He is happy. On the way back to Uruk, he stops at a spring to bathe. While he bathes, A snake smells the plant and carries it away. The snake sheds its skin and slithers off. Now it will be young every year. Gilgamesh is left with nothing. He sits on the ground and weeps. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, not a hero, not a conqueror. Tired, older, with no plant, no hope of immortality. He walks up to the walls he built himself, and he speaks the words scribes copied for 1,000 years. Walk around the wall of Uruk, examine its foundation. Do you see anywhere its equal? This is the answer. The immortality the gods grant is loneliness. But Gilgamesh, dying, remained with us, in the walls that still stand, in the tablets we can still read, in a story that has outlasted him by 5,000 years. The tablets that lay underground at Nineveh are now in the British Museum in London. The 11th tablet, the one with the flood story that George Smith saw. The 12th, a short edition about Enkidu's soul returning from the underworld. If you walk up to the case, you can see the traces of fire and the same cuneiform hand that scribes used for King Ashurbanipal. In Uruk, the walls still stand. Not whole, but they remain. Bricks molded and dried in the sun 5,000 years ago. The same bricks with Gilgamesh's name stamped into them. Last time, we stood at the threshold of writing, at the clay tokens and tablets of Uruk, at the accountants counting grain and oil. Now we know what came after. Not just lists, but what perhaps made writing worthwhile. Stories about friendship, about death, about walls that outlasted the hands that built them. Gilgamesh did not find immortality, but he left us his name. He left us the walls of Uruk, and he left us an epic that has outlasted him by 5,000 years. The tablets we have followed in this story now sit in museums, some in London, some in Berlin, some in Baghdad. You can see them. On one, the most complete, there is a line scribes copied for 1,000 years. Walk around the wall of Uruk, examine its foundation. Do you see anywhere its equal? And there is one more tablet, small, palm-sized. On it are just a few lines. Not an epic, not a story, just a list. But in that list there is a name, not Gilgamesh. Another. The name of a man who sat in the temple at Uruk and counted rations, the accountant with whom it all began. We do not know his name. The tablet did not preserve it. But we know he existed, and that his dull gray work was the first step toward Gilgamesh speaking to us across 5,000 years. In the next story, we will talk about the library that survived the fire, about the king who gathered all the knowledge of the world, and about how fire, which destroyed a city, preserved tablets for us for 2,500 years. For now, thank you for being here on this journey. Listen to this story. Rest. The tablets George Smith was sorting at the British Museum in 1872 came from a place archaeologists call the Library of Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was the last great king of Assyria. He ruled in the 7th century before our era, 2,500 years after Gilgamesh. Ashurbanipal was not a warrior. He did not like going on campaigns, but he loved books. He sent scribes to every corner of his empire with one order: find ancient tablets and bring them to Nineveh. If a tablet is written in Sumerian, translate it into Akkadian. If a tablet is broken, copy it. If a tablet is kept in a temple that does not want to give it up, buy it or take it by force. The scribes traveled to Babylon, to Uruk, to Nippur. They copied everything they could find: epics, prayers, incantations, medical texts, king lists, tablets with star omens. They created the world's first systematic library, not just a collection of tablets, but an organized collection where every text had its place. When archaeologists found this library in the mid-19th century, They dug up more than 30,000 tablets and fragments. Among them were the 12 tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The library of Ashurbanipal stood in Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. In 612 before our era, the city was besieged and destroyed. Palaces were burned, walls were torn down, inhabitants were killed or taken into slavery. But the fire that destroyed the city preserved the tablets. The clay they were made of was fired in the flames and became hard as stone. If not for the fire, the tablets would have crumbled to dust in 1,000 years. Instead, they lay underground for 25 centuries and reached us almost intact. When archaeologists began excavating Nineveh, they found the tablets where the scribes had left them. Some were on shelves. The shelves had rotted away, but the tablets had fallen and remained in stacks. Some were in the copying rooms. Next to them, they found clay jars that held water and the reed styluses used for writing. Today, the tablets from Ashurbanipal's library are in the British Museum in London. If you ever go there, find the room where they are displayed. In the case, you will see the tablet with the Epic of Gilgamesh. You can see the traces of fire on it, and the same cuneiform hand that scribes used 2,500 years ago. The tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh that George Smith sorted are now in the British Museum in London. You can see them in the Mesopotamian gallery. Traces of fire are still visible on them. The same fire that destroyed Nineveh in 612 before our era. But Ashurbanipal's library held more than just the 12 tablets of Gilgamesh. In total, archaeologists found over 30,000 tablets and fragments. Among them, medical texts describing how to treat teeth and how to diagnose illness by the pulse, king lists where Gilgamesh is recorded as a real ruler, star maps, and one tablet with an incantation against evil spirits. Evil spirit who creeps along the walls, let him be seized, let him be bound, let him be wiped from the face of the earth. This was the world's first library where texts were not just piled together, but organized by subject. On each tablet, scribes placed a note: Palace of Ashurbanipal, King of the world, King of Assyria. And they added the title and the tablet number, so you could find what you needed. Today in Uruk, where Gilgamesh ruled 5,000 years ago, the walls he built still stand. German archaeologists found them in the 1920s. The walls are made of bricks molded and dried in the sun. On some bricks, there is a stamp with Gilgamesh's name. The bricks lie where builders left them 5,000 years ago. In 2003, when the National Museum in Baghdad was looted, many ancient tablets disappeared. A few years later, one was found on the black market in London. It was a tablet with the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was returned to Iraq. Today you can see it in Baghdad. Gilgamesh did not find immortality, but his name, his walls, his story reached us, and that is more than Utnapishtim got, because the immortality the gods grant is loneliness. Gilgamesh, dying, remained with us. There is one tablet we haven't talked about. It is not part of the 12 tablets of the Epic. It was found separately. On it is written the story of how Gilgamesh returned from his journey and asked the god Shamash, "Why must people die?" The god did not answer. Instead, he showed Gilgamesh his city, the walls he built, the canals his people dug, the children running through the streets. And Gilgamesh understood. This tablet is in Berlin, in the Pergamon Museum. It was found at Uruk in the 1920s, in a layer archaeologists call the Gilgamesh layer. It lay among bricks that had fallen from the wall. The bricks had Gilgamesh's name. The tablet had no name, only the story. In 2015, when the Pergamon Museum closed its tablet gallery for restoration, German archaeologists made 3D scans of every tablet. The scans showed what the eye could not see. On the back of this tablet, there were fingerprints. Someone 5,000 years ago held this tablet while the clay was still wet, and their fingers left marks. We do not know who it was. A scribe? A priest? Gilgamesh himself? We will never know. But the fingerprints remain. Today at Uruk, you can see more than just the walls. German archaeologists, who have been digging there since 1912, have restored part of the Iana temple, the same temple where the statue of the goddess Inanna stood, whose marble face we saw in the last story. The temple walls are again decorated with clay cones, red, black, white. They are pressed into the plaster just as they were 5,000 years ago. When sunlight falls on them, the walls shimmer. Gilgamesh did not live to see this, but his city did. His walls did. And his name? On bricks, on tablets, in the museums of London, Berlin, Baghdad. In the next story, we will talk about what came after Gilgamesh, about the first laws, the first empires, the first king who called himself king of the world. For now, thank you for being here.